Your Excellency, thank you for taking the time to speak to CNBC. And here we are in Singapore. You were here as part of a delegation promoting ties in Southeast Asia. Undoubtedly, there are still questions over the rift with your Gulf allies. And I just want to bring up some comments from the Saudi foreign minister at the UN General Assembly just weeks ago. In fact, he talked and said specifically that Doha's practices of providing financial support to terrorism while disseminating violent hate speech is unacceptable. Does this sound to you like a message from a government that is ready to come to the table and try to find an agreement here?
Well, first of all, thank you, Nancy, for hosting me today. Just regarding these continuous statements and allegations from the Saudis and from the other blockading nations toward Qatar, which has never been proven, this is something which is all of us, we are against. This is something which is related to the collective security of our region, which is a priority for Qatar, as it's a priority for them. But just throwing those allegations without even basing them by evidence and supporting them by evidence is just showing consistency in their behavior that they don't want to solve this issue. They started the entire issue, the entire crisis, with a cyber attack. This cyber attack is to create a foundation for the crisis. So if there was a real justification for this crisis, they wouldn't need to attack our state news agency, to put a fabricated statement attributed to the emir in order to launch this campaign. So we are still calling them, if you have any allegations, if you have anything, any concerns need to be addressed by Qatar, we are willing to sit on the table, show us your concerns. If there is something which needs measures being taken by Qatar and should be taken by Qatar and by the other countries, because it's a collective concern for everyone.
Saudi Arabia has denied that a cyber attack was behind this issue, though, and it really continues to be their word against yours and vice versa here. So how does this end? How are you going to eventually get an agreement?
Well, first of all, their denial actually is non-true, because we were just in Riyadh 2 days before the cyber attack. Why none of them has raised any concern? Before that, even a few days, we were also in Riyadh and at the Ministerial Council for the Gulf, for the GCC. So they never raised any concern about any issue. We were talking about regional issues. We were discussing the future of the GCC, and none of them has raised any of those issues and those allegations. The cyber attack was the spark for the entire crisis. There is no doubts that they have initiated this cyber attack in order to create a basis for this crisis. Now, since this crisis is taking more than 4 months, everybody, from our side at least, we recognize that we want to have a solution for this, because we see that there is no winner out of this, because we have a lot of other challenges in our region, and we don't need a further crisis to the other open war zones. All our allies and friends, they want a solution for this crisis, including United States, even including the President of the United States, who was calling to bring the leaders together in order to put an end for this crisis. The Emir of Kuwait was leading the mediation, and he's continuing his effort. Yesterday he was in Riyadh, but there is no any result being realized yet. This is showing a consistent behavior from the blockading nation just to continue the crisis, disrespect and bully. This is it's all about. It's nothing about that they want to really to stop financing terrorism or to stop the hatred speech, while they are promoting and doing the same now by promoting incitement against my country, promoting a regime change against my country. So there are a contradiction between what they are saying as statements and what's their real activities on the ground.
You mentioned regime change. Do you think Saudi Arabia is actively looking at ways to bring about regime change as we speak?
Well, if we see that their officials, government officials, are talking about regime change, if we see their government officials talking about protesting and inciting the people to go and protest against their government, so it's about regime change. If we see a country which is bringing back the dark ages of tribes and putting them together in order to create a pressure on a connected tribes to them in Qatar, it means that they want to destabilize this country. So Their behavior, as I just mentioned, is just showing that they are not willing for a solution. They are into escalation. They are into thinking about regime change and other things. But from Qatar side, we maintained very calm temper in dealing with them. We never escalated against anyone. We were always calling for dialogue. We were always calling them if there is any concerns we are willing to address. But from the other hand, we don't see the same thing.
In addition to the threat of regime change, there have also been reports that the UAE was looking at an invasion into Qatar, perhaps with the use of mercenaries. Also reports that Saudi could have been looking at an outright invasion as well. Do you think that US President Donald Trump played a role in really influencing Saudi Arabia not to go forward with an invasion?
Well, since the beginning of the crisis, based on our assessment, we have seen that there were some possibilities for military activity, whether it's invasion or intervention, or maybe by different means. Our allies in the United States has been active from the beginning, trying to calm down the entire situation, as well as the Emir of Kuwait. So everybody worked collectively in order to de-escalate the situation and really to resort to a dialogue rather than going for escalation. Regarding the way they are dealing with the entire matter is just showing irresponsibility toward the region, toward the regional security.
When you talk about the U.S. role currently as it stands, we know there have been some mixed messages, if you will, between the U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who I know you've spoken with on the matter, and U.S. President Donald Trump. Do you consider the U.S. a reliable ally in mediating this dispute?
Definitely, they are a reliable ally. We have very strong ties with the United States. We are hosting more than 11,000 U.S. soldiers. We have the largest U.S. base in the Middle East. We are the center of command for the coalition, for the global coalition against Daesh. There are a lot of things and a lot of joint interest between Qatar and the United States, which make it necessarily that this region to be stable, which make it necessarily that both of us are reliable allies to each other.
And do you think the U.S. President and the Secretary of State are aligned on the matter?
Well, from our perspective, what we got from the U.S. President since the beginning of the crisis, he was calling that the situation need to be dealt by dialogue, and also during his calls with the Emir, as well as the different government agencies, the Defense Department, the State Department, they were always being advocate for the solution toward dialogue. So we didn't see a mixed messages. If we are considering a tweet or two is sending a mixed message, but this is something not relevant to us. What really concerns us, what's the overall U.S. policy toward this crisis, which has been consistent from the beginning of the crisis to put an end for it and to solve it by dialogue.
You mentioned the fact that Qatar houses thousands of U.S. troops. In fact, it's an important part of the base in the fight against terrorism, against ISIS. Do you think the battle against ISIS has suffered as a result of the conflict taking place?
Definitely, yes, because look, Nancy, 90% of our supplies, of our food supply, medicine supply, is coming through the land border. And those supplies, part of it is going to the base. Second, we have the airspace which was blocked. The Qatari airplanes which are supporting the logistic airplane for the military, they are not allowed to fly over their skies. So it's only allowed to use one path, which is toward north, toward Iran. So this is an effect, as well as our officers who were participating in the coalition activity in the 5th Fleet in Bahrain, they've been expelled because of this. So there are a lot of things which undermine the efforts, the global efforts in countering Daesh by this crisis, by the blockade, and by the measures they have been taken against Qatar.
The U.S. military has recently said it's going to suspend some drills with Gulf allies. What impact is that having? And ultimately, if the U.S. military were to say we're going to put a freeze, in fact, in some weapons sales, some arms sales to our Gulf allies as well, would that be enough to bring the parties to the table to talk?
Well, we are hopeful that they don't need to do all those measures to bring the parties to the table. We hope that wisdom will prevail at the end by the blockading countries, and they come to the table and to have a direct talks with us about whatever the concerns. But what we have seen from the last 4 months now, there is a consistent systematic behavior of disrespect and bully. So they do whatever they want despite the demands which are coming from different countries whom are trying to put an end for this crisis. We hope that at the end they will come to the dialogue, and we hope that they come to, at the right time. They don't even just keep pushing it away in order that they think that they will make Qatar weaker. Qatar became much stronger than before the blockade.
When you talk about the reasons that Saudi Arabia may not be coming to the table, one of the big sticking points to them is your relationship with Iran. When Qatar decided to fully restore diplomatic ties with Iran, what are you trying to achieve here?
Well, this accusation, it's entirely baseless. Now, we have differences in our policies in Iran, but with Iran, sorry, there are differences. But between us as a Gulf countries, we have agreed on a common policy toward Iran, and it is already there in the resolutions of the GCC, which is that we need to engage in a dialogue with Iran based on certain principles, which is non-intervention of each other affairs, no undermining of security, no exportation of any revolutionary ideology or that stuff, avoiding or denouncing the sectarianism. So all those principles being agreed on between the Gulf countries. And these principles which Qatar stick to and still sticking to. Our policy toward Iran remained the same and didn't change because of the crisis. They were trying to create just a justification to legitimize their blockade. Our restoration to our diplomatic relation with Iran, it doesn't mean that Qatar changes policy, because if we will go back to the reason, the original reason of the withdrawal of our ambassador there was just a gesture of solidarity with the Saudis when they attacked their diplomatic mission, which is not exist anymore, because we cannot show solidarity to a country which blockaded our people. So that's the only thing. Our relation with Iran, we are neighbors. We have borders together. We are sharing a gas field together. We have to overcome and bridge the gaps in our differences by dialogue. We cannot increase the tension in the region. We have to resort to dialogue at the end.
Has the U.S. ever expressed concerns about your support for Iran, your relationships with Iran? Because we know U.S. President Donald Trump has his concerns with Iran that he's voiced in recent days.
There is absolutely no support to Iran. Qatar and Iran relationship has been very consistent since long time. We have differences, as I told you. We are opponents in what's happening in Syria. We are opponents in what's happening in Yemen. We are opponents in what's happening in their policies in Iraq. And when we are adversaries on those different political battles, we have been the front runner, and in this we have been in the front line in Syria. We have been the ones who are still from the beginning, and we are still the lead in the region, which is vocal and advocate against Bashar al-Assad regime. So there is nothing being changed about our policy. US, they have their own policy toward Iran, which is represent a high concern for them. Yes, we understand, but at the end, US is thousands miles away from Iran. We are neighboring and border with Iran. Now, after this blockade, if we have just one pathway from the north toward Iran, and the three sides, east, west, and south, is just blockaded just because of those blockading nations decided to isolate my country and to put it in siege. How can I assure the food supply for my country? How can I assure the medicine supply for my country? So there are things which are enforcing me to increase my bilateral tie with them. And in fact, the ties between the GCC and Iran as a group, 96% of this bilateral trade is between Emirates and Iran. It's not between Qatar and Iran. And Qatar, in the 4%, is ranked number 4. So we are the fifth trade partner among the Gulf countries, and the fourth from the 4%, which doesn't represent more than $50 million of bilateral trade. So what kind of a special relation between Qatar and Iran?
So why, in your opinion, is Saudi Arabia making Iran a big part of the issue?
Well, they since the starting of the crisis, they've been talking about Iran. They've been talking about everything they believe that might legitimize for them and gain sympathy to what they did to us with the West. And this is the main reason, the main driver for them. They don't want to appear for the Western country that they did this out of they want to just hijack the country policy and keep it under its guardianship, which is totally unacceptable for Qatar. They want just to show that we are doing this for the sake of the regional security, while they are undermining the regional security from the other hand.
Let's talk about the region here in Southeast Asia. What are you hoping to achieve on this trip?
Well, Qatar is part of Asia, of course, and 90% of our exports is coming to Asia. So Asia is representing a very important market. In fact, ASEAN countries are 50% of our market. So we have a continuous dialogue with the Asian countries, which is hoping to improve and develop the relationship and try to untap the potential in this relationship, which is we have seen realized now in our investments, which has been dramatically increased in the last few years in Malaysia, Singapore, in Indonesia, China. So Qatar investments is widespread in this region, which we believe this is the region we belong to, and it represents very high importance for us. So, in fact, Singapore as well has a special status with us, where we have this high-level joint committee between the two countries since now 12 years. More than 46 enterprises being realized out of this joint committee, which is two of the major environmental projects of Qatar was conducted out as a result for this committee. So there is a lot of progress and a lot of work between Qatar and the Asian region, the Southeast Asia especially.
Do you sense that some of the countries you're meeting with, including Malaysia, where I know you've just come from, are they worried that they have divided loyalties? Because we know that Saudi Arabia has been in the region as well, made some investments in Malaysia. Do you find yourself trying to reassure these countries that, in fact, their loyalties don't have to be split?
Well, Qatar is a matured state. We have dealt with the matter from the beginning, and we have used the high moral ground, and we never try to pressure any country. While from the other hand, Saudi and the blockading countries, they were trying to exercise whatever kind of leverage they have on the countries, especially in Africa and some countries of Southeast Asia, which we see this is a blackmailing for nations and trying to impose something on their sovereignty, which we don't accept. Countries which decided to join their club without any support for the arguments, this is something up to them, but it's really mean that those countries are not having their a full control over their decision-making process, while countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and the others, they never been subject for this, and we highly respect those responses, which is what should be and how it should be in sovereign nations. No country can impose any demands or anything on another sovereign nation. So they have their own assessment, and they have to decide whether Qatar is a country which is a reliable partner they can work with, or Qatar is a country which is a source of disturbance for them.
And I have to ask, because you mentioned that pretty soon you'll be heading to the U.S., going to Washington, D.C. In fact, what is the agenda for that trip? Will you be meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State or other members of the administration?
I'll be following up on our last meeting with the President Trump, which took place in September between His Highness the Emir and the President. And I'll be meeting some of the U.S. officials, as well as some of the also Congress and senators and congressmen and senators in the Hill, in order to update on the situation and to follow up on the matter. The Secretary of State, I might meet him in the region just before my trip to the US, so as he might have a visit to Qatar as well.
And US President Donald Trump sounded very confident that he could help bring about a resolution very soon, I think in the coming days, weeks even. Is he right to be that confident?
Well, he was very much into the situation, and he was speaking very seriously about it, that he doesn't want to see this conflict prolonging. But from the other hand, as I told you, we didn't see a positive response from the blockading nations, as we still see the status quo remain. We are hopeful that things will reach to a solution, and we will come to dialogue. And also we are confident that US can play a strong role, and President Trump can play a positive role in this, in bringing all the leaders together.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time today indeed.
Thank you very much, Nancy.